and welcome to The View from 4 Feet and 3 Inches. I'm your host, Cassidy Huff. I am a white woman with shoulder length, shorter blonde hair that is down today. I am wearing a black sweatshirt with a tan background behind me because I have a wonderful virtual guest today, my friend, Miss Tiffany Yu. Thank you so much for being on the show, Tiffany.
Thanks for having me. I'll provide a visual description as well. I'm
Yeah,
a
please.
Taiwanese American woman with below the shoulder length black hair, wearing a blue top, and I'm joining you from my place in Los Angeles, where I have a book next to me with an orange gradient cover, which is a book that I recently wrote called the Anti-Ableist Manifesto.
Yes. So that is, I mean, Tiffany, obviously you're my friend, so I obviously wanted to have you on because of that reason, but also because of your book. So do you want to just give the audience who may not know you, just a brief description of, who you are, what you do, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, so my entrance into this space comes from my own lived experience. About 27 years ago, I was involved in a car accident where my dad unfortunately passed away, and I acquired a handful of apparent and non-apparent disabilities, including permanently paralyzing one of my arms and being diagnosed with PTSD. We don't have to share all of that if we don't want to, but I think it provides some context just to share that I did acquire my disability. I know that all of our stories are really important in this space and color a lot of our disability experiences. So, as someone who acquired my disability, I spent the first 10 plus years kind of hiding it in a lot of different ways, and have spent the last 15 years unlearning a lot of that. And so today I run an organization called Diversability. We're a very large disability centered community focused on elevating disability pride and visibility, power, and leadership. And actually, you know what? I spent some time bucketing all the things that I do, whether you want to call it like a Tiffany empire or the umbrella is Tiffany as a disability advocate. One arm is Diversability, so building disability community. Second arm is what I call education. This book is included in that, social media content. Then the third arm is what I call economic empowerment. So, how can we invest more money back into the disability community? That's either through events that we host or our team at Diversability paying people. I also run a micro grant for disability projects called the Awesome Foundation Disability Chapter. And then the last arm I call civic engagement. And actually, this will be the first place I'm announcing it, saying it out loud, but I actually serve on the NIH National Advisory Board for Medical Rehabilitation Research. But previously I was on the San Francisco Marriage Disability Council, and finishing up my time on one of the volunteer advisory groups for LA 28 Olympic and Paralympic Games. But hopefully transitioning into something else related, or even, I mean, that's part of the reason why I moved to LA. So TBD on what happens there.
That's so exciting. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I was trying to figure out earlier how we met, or like when we met for the first time, and I truly don't remember.
I think it was the modeling show.
Really?
Do you think we met before then?
The one that I walked in?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I knew I was definitely aware of you before
Did
then.
Were you cast in person or virtually?
I was cast in person.
Okay. So I was there for most of the casting. I would have welcomed you because it was cast in my ex's studio.
Oh!
And he was in the show.
Who? Do you feel comfortable saying?
Yeah, his name's Greg. I actually recorded the audiobook of the Anti-Ableist Manifesto at Tiny Room 2 at the studio.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
You can stay friends with someone when the relationship doesn't work out.
I agree.
But I recently went to probably one of our mutual friends' housewarming parties, and a lot of our mutual friends are disabled, and we're all just hanging out there, and we're like, this is probably one of a rare times where like we don't feel weird like having to having to have someone explain to us what's like all the different snacks that are on the table or
Yeah.
access needs. And I was like, I would love to see more of those, right? Like Cassidy, you and I just saw each other yesterday at another event.
Yep.
That did bring a lot of the disability community together. Also brought a lot of other people that I didn't recognize, but I just appreciated that
Yeah.
everyone was there.
I know. I was like, I don't know who you are, but it's cool that you're here. I was looking around. I was like, I know that person. I know that person. Who is that? Who's over
I mean,
there?
the majority of it for me was like, who is that? But like, I'm so glad that you're here. But I think
Yeah.
that's part of this work is like
Hmm.
coalition building and solidarity building and thinking about all the different
Agreed.
communities that you can bring in to help support and amplify your work.
Yeah. 100%. So I want to talk about diversability a little bit. I know. So I've read your book. Not all of it, but I'm reading it. And I got it early because Tiffany loves me. And so I have been reading it for the last few weeks, and I'm a really slow reader, so I apologize. I haven't read the whole thing yet. But um, I read that, correct me if I'm wrong, in college, you started a disability club. And so is that where Diversability was born through
Yes.
that idea?
Yes. So
Okay.
we are turning 15 this year. And actually
It's exciting.
it was called Diversability in 2009. And our um even if you go back to like some 2009 coverage in my university newspaper, it'll say Tiffany Yu wants to start this disability club at Georgetown called Diversability, and it's on a movement to build disability pride.
Okay.
So I don't even think I knew what disability pride was in 2009, but I like the idea of the potential of what I think it had the capacity to become. But I will
Yeah.
say in 2009, when I told people that's what I wanted to do, people told me I was radical. I'm probably like in the disability community, I'm like not seen as not seen as radical,
Yeah.
but they thought I was radical because they couldn't understand how a disabled person could be proud. And
Mm.
I will say that, you know, with the book coming out and reflecting on Diversability's beginnings, and actually that was Georgetown's first disability student club. And a couple years ago, maybe last year or 2 years ago, I got invited back to Georgetown because they did their first ever disability community graduation. And they invited me back as the
That's
person who,
so
yeah,
cool.
as the person who had started Georgetown's first disability student club, which I actually didn't know. And, you know, in a lot of ways, and I don't know if you know, there are so many disability advocates who have actually come out of Georgetown. Lydia Brown,
No, I didn't.
Lydia Brown, Amy Mullins, Anna
Oh, wow.
Landry, probably more. Taylor
Yeah.
Price. I'm pausing there, but that was a lot of people I just named.
Yeah, that was like quite a few people. That's wild. I had no idea.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, essentially, to me, Diversability feels in a lot of ways what we were in 2009, but just bigger and virtual. So you
Okay.
could call us a disability club for everyone. Sorry, for the world that doesn't exist within a university environment. But it was actually what actually started this disability student club was an internship in finance where I got
Wow.
introduced to their disability employee resource group, which essentially, I don't know why they call them employee resource groups. You could just call them clubs.
Yeah,
But I
true.
was part of like the women's group at during my summer internship and their Asian group, and I got introduced to their disability group. And then I went back to college after that internship and I said, we have the women's group, we have an Asian group, we don't have a disability group. And it was a great way for me to get to meet other people, for me to not feel so disempowered or isolated in my own experience. And now, thank you to social media, we have a lot of other opportunities to get to connect with other disabled people.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, could you explain what Diversability does, what your mission is?
Yeah, so our mission is to elevate disability pride, and we do that in like four different ways. You'll notice I just like categorize everything in my life. So the first category is community. So a lot of times people will come to us at Diversity and they'll say like, oh, what advocacy issues are you tackling? Are you tackling accessible housing, access to healthcare, education, reproductive justice? Like, I mean, climate justice. I mean, literally every single issue is a disability.
Yeah.
And what I thought was interesting was when I started Diversability, I was not a disability advocate, but I knew how to start clubs because I had actually co-founded Georgetown's first ever Taiwanese American club, co-founded it. And so I created this club, and what I found was that once you create a place where other people start to feel a little bit more confident that they're not alone, then you
Hmm.
can, maybe it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then you can like jump to the next level, which could be what
Yeah.
areas do you care about that you want to spend time using your voice for. So the first is the community. So maybe, and I will say for a lot of people, Diversability, we exist as a free Facebook group, and then we have some premium options if you decide. But for a lot of people, we are the first disability community that they're joining. And the group is open to non disabled allies or even people who don't yet realize that their disabilities are considered disabilities, or maybe they're earlier on in their journey and not ready to ascribe to a
Hmm.
disability identity. And that's okay. You know, wherever you are in your journey, whether it's Diversability or not, I hope you have community in your life because for
Yeah.
me, that's the starting point of where you start to gain your confidence and determine how you want to use your power and privilege to fight for justice. So, category number one. Category number two is events. So, it's great that we have this asynchronous community, but we also need a place for people to gather. Or if you don't thrive in an asynchronous uh, posting platform and want a place where you can go meet people and learn about the things that they're working on, we're actually hosting events every single week, and some of them are open to the public.
Okay.
Then our third, I'll brush through these last two. Then our third are, the third is what I call the D30 disability impact list. Oh, so on the event side, one of the things in our early years was we had a lot of people who wanted to do more speaking, but it was hard to find places for them to speak. So essentially, a
Mm.
lot of what Diversability exists as is like when we couldn't find a disability community, we built one. When we couldn't find a stage for disabled people to speak at, we built one. We
Right.
used to host more in-person events in like 7 or 8 key cities that were all doing what I would call like moth style or TEDx style events where you'd have speakers give these 5-minute talks.
Yeah.
Now transition to virtual. So that was the events. And then when we couldn't find a list that really, a global list that honored disability leadership, we created one called the D30 Disability Impact List. And this is an open
Okay.
nomination where every single year, 30 disabled people globally are honored. And then the last is kind of what I call like research and education. So now that we've built a little bit of a platform at Diversability, how can we use it to help disseminate information? So one
Right.
partnership I'm really proud of is a couple years ago, we partnered with an organization that was trying to get more more people to fill out the census. And we did a partnership where not only did we translate it into Mandarin, Tagalog, and Spanish, because that was the area that we were
Wow.
focused on, we also did a ton of research as to how census data is used to impact different disability programs. And
Okay.
that was a social media thing, but it also went onto radio and print too. And so we do some of that because there's a lot of research actually coming out. I mean, the fact that people still are not aware that over 1 billion people globally live with a disability, we're
Yeah.
not some niche topic, right? And
Right.
and even like I'll go out and I'll say for people who continue with the narrative that disabled people need to be fixed or that we're broken or that we're seen as less than, 1 billion people is a lot of people. I find it very hard to believe that over 1 billion of us are not normal. Like to me, it's a
Yeah.
very normal part of my human experience, and over 1 billion people's human experience. So, um, even if, and for me, it's like, even if we're still not all aware of that one stat of how big our community is, how much other research is out there? Like it's a $13 trillion global disability market. Um,
Right.
and so maybe part of this is my finance brain of wanting to just get the research and data out there And if we can use our platforms to do that, then we'll do that.
I love that. Well, as a young disabled woman, thank you so
Well,
much
thank
for
you.
starting
I mean,
this
you're using
book.
your platform too to do so much education. It's really incredible, and it makes me feel really hopeful about the emergence of the disabled voice across social media.
Thank you. I'm trying. I'm working on it. So I know right before we started, I asked you if there were any topics that you want to talk about, and I actually find this one really interesting. So I am, in case anybody doesn't know, super passionate about disability representation in mass media. So film, television, modeling, ads, commercials, things like that. So I am, represented by an agency. I go out on auditions all the time. Mainly, I do a lot of voiceover and a lot of acting. But you are really focused on disability representation in literature. So I want to talk about that. What has since releasing this book, the pre-process, writing it, going through, publishing. I'm currently writing a book, so I think this is going to be really interesting for me. What has your experience been like as a disabled woman?
Ooh. So I will say, I'll take a step back and say, you and I both live in LA. That's why when we were talking about the studio and you're talking about the podcast, I was like, you will be a future guest on if my podcast comes back. And then we can record in
Yay!
the fancy studio. Um, but
I'm so excited.
and then we can have the cool footage where we look like all the other podcasters. But I digress.
Where it's really high quality. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
guess what I want to say is you and I both live in LA, and I'm someone who grew up in the DC area, lived in New York, also lived in San Francisco before moving here. And
Mhm.
as I've lived in all these different places, one of the things that I try to do through my work at Diversability is also build local disability ecosystems. So DC to me was very heavy policy and politics. New York to me was finance, fashion, uh, kind of startups in parentheses, because then
Yeah.
San Francisco was startups not in parentheses, tech innovation. And then moving here is in a category I call narrative change, which is the work you're doing around modeling, acting, having representation, which being represented, which is huge. So with the book, I would say I had and still have a lot of imposter syndrome calling myself a writer or an author. That is not my preferred method to get information out. But as I
Mm.
was thinking about this process, and I think about how we can scale change, I love this social media series I have called the Anti-Ableism series. I
Me
have put
too.
out into the universe that you will come on it. And I keep forgetting that when I see you, we should just record it.
We're so distracted by everything else that's
I mean, there was a
happening
lot
that
there was
both
a
of us
lot
are
going
like,
on that
so.
day. We were slowly getting shifted to exit exit the venue. There was food, there was people there. But anyway,
They literally kicked us out.
very gently so.
Yeah.
But I want to say I lost my train of thought, but I'm going to pick it right back up. So with the book, it's now my whole brain in a book. And I will say access for the win in the sense that the entire first draft of the book was written using speech to text technology. I find it a lot
Wow.
easier to talk than it is for me to write large amounts of text. And I will say, I think part of this didn't make it into the book, and I'm trying to figure out how I want to describe it, but I call it like the assumption funnel. And essentially, what it is are the ableist assumptions that other people impose on us that we then internalize. So, one example
Mm.
of the assumption funnel could be because you assume that disabled voices don't matter, you don't give them a book deal, so they don't write a book, right? And this is inspired by this this ad that came out with Madison Tevlin around combating. I think the hashtag was like "assume that I can." So
Mm-hmm.
then the way that assumption funnel, that first funnel, then becomes my own internalized ableism. It becomes because I can only type with one hand, it means that I can't write a book, so I don't write a book, right? So there's both external assumption funnel and internal assumption funnel. All of that to say, I will say that I found a literary agent, Team Charles. I try to shout him out. I don't want to be annoying, so I stopped tagging him, but um, but I
In every post.
but I found or a literary agent reached out to me in 2021 who mainly represents Asian American and Pacific Islander authors. So this was an example where intersectionality kind of came into play. And I will say that I am hoping we are part of a cultural movement, not only in the AAPI community, but also in the disability community, where people are realizing that our narratives are much more mainstream than people think.
Mm.
So so yeah, and all of that to say, in the next year or 2 years, the number of disabled friends who already have books out right now or will have books coming out manifesting yours has been so different than what things looked like 15 years ago. And
Yeah.
and I will say one of the things I appreciate, in writing this book, I spent a lot of time reflecting on the origins of how I became an advocate accidentally. And 15 years,
Me too. I also became an advocate accidentally.
yeah. And in some ways, I actually think maybe that accident is not atypical. I think it's something
I agree.
happened, some injustice or something we noticed in our own lives that we said, this can't just be me. And then
Yep.
we noticed that there were other people who related too. But in 2009
Mhm.
it was really hard to get anyone to join Diversability, and now with this Facebook group that we probably have about 20 to 30 people requesting to join every single week, which
I
goes
love
to
that.
show that there are still people out there who need community. And I actually think that the powers that be, all of these systems of oppression, stay in power because of the experience of isolation that all of us in the disability community experience in one way or another.
Right.
But sorry, back to publishing. You will notice my
No, no, I'm like taking everything and I'm like, yeah.
but yeah, I feel like we are on the precipice of a cultural shift. What do you think? Around
Yeah, no, I
more
agree.
disability representation in film, in media, in this type of media, in book form as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I just every time I see another disabled author that comes out with a book, I'm just so happy. Because and with yours specifically, every time I pick it up and read a chapter, read multiple chapters, I just this one thought keeps coming to mind of how transformative this would have been when I was younger. Like reading a book from a a disabled woman and who's telling her story. Like that would have really hit me
Mm,
when I was younger to see like, oh, like I can grow up and do something like this because I, like you, I'm sure, I'm not going to speak for you, but I've realized this is a pretty universal experience for specifically disabled people. We don't see ourselves in the industries that we want to be in. And so it's really, really difficult. You know, it was really difficult for me when I was younger and still sometimes as a 22-year-old to see the acting world and every single movie that comes out and be like, man, there's no one in that looks like me. There's no one in that, or if it is, you know, if there is a character with a disability, usually they're not a disabled actor. And so it's really, really discouraging. And so I loved entertainment when I was younger, and I'm a writer by heart, at heart, and so I used to write everything down, and I've always said since I was really, really young that I was going to write a book. And so now that I'm actually beginning to write a book, it's really, really encouraging to see people like me who have already paved the way,
mm.
you know, who are helping to to show me and others like us what is possible. And so I thank you. I know that you say that you have a lot of imposter syndrome surrounding, calling yourself a writer or whatever, but and I understand that. Believe me, I do completely get that. I have imposter syndrome every day. Um, but at the same time, I think that really understanding your impact on little kids, even if they don't fully understand the material yet, seeing others like them in the industry that they want to be in. I mean, I think that you specifically are really helping shape the next generation of disabled people.
I appreciate
uh,
that.
yeah, and like reading your book, I mean, every time I read a chapter, I put it down and I tell my boyfriend, I'm like, man, did you know this and this and this? And he's like, whoa, that's really interesting. So like I'm learning about being anti-ableist and helping to shape the world away from ableism, and I feel like I'm learning a lot even as a fellow advocate. So what is something, all of that being said, um, what is something that if there was one thing you could tell the world about how to be against ableism in their lives, what would it be?
Ooh, this is why I wrote a
I know
whole
this is a
this is
hard
why I wrote a whole book about it though.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
I think something I'm really focused on, and I do want to acknowledge the disability justice principle about being anti-capitalist.
Yeah.
While we're currently in it, figure out a way to support a disabled person's livelihood. But if we want to take capitalism out, I guess it. But that has actually been a focus. I think about like where I envision my advocacy going next, and
Yeah.
it's what I call disability centered economic justice. It's despite being over 15% of the world's population, only seeing 1 to 2% of philanthropic dollars going toward disability advocacy. It's the stat that it is 400 disabled entrepreneurs are 400 times less likely to receive venture funding. It is, uh, even thinking in your world in the entertainment industry, like the number of disability stories that are seen as too niche that with a little bit of funding could could get out there, right? And
Yeah.
and I actually think that the more disability narratives that are out there, we will stop being so nitpicky about seeing a story that isn't in alignment with our own. I'm kind of just
Mm.
reflecting on a comment that was made yesterday at the screening that we were at about how they had received some feedback around how the film could be portrayed. Um,
Yeah. Or you shouldn't be doing
Yeah,
this,
and
or
it's
yeah.
one person's story, right? And I'm one person who wrote this
Yeah.
book. So yeah, that's what I would say is support a disabled person's livelihood. And I can give an example of this. So
Please.
I received an advance for this book, which meant that I received some money to write it. And I used that money to hire a disabled editor and hire a disabled designer who created the manifesto art, named Jennifer White Johnson. And then, even as the book came out, I put together a list of disability owned bookstores. And if I was going to give a talk somewhere and they wanted to purchase books instead of going through the typical bulk book vendors, we decided to go straight to the disability owned bookstores to purchase
Okay.
books from there. And our launch event was held, or our LA book launch event was held at a disability owned bookstore here in LA called The Last Bookstore, which
That's disability owned?
yes. And actually what is fascinating about that, because I've been telling people in LA that we hosted at the Last Bookstore and they tell me how much they love the place and the book tunnel on the second floor, which I haven't
Yes.
personally seen yet. Most people don't realize that it's disability owned, and that's the point. That's the
No.
point though, is that we exist everywhere. And the Last
Yeah.
Bookstore, if you are in LA, we're getting very LA specific. I mean, it is it is a staple of downtown LA. Um,
Yeah.
and so like that's kind of how I've been, like, for me it's like, okay, I got some money, and yes, I'll compensate myself for my labor, but also how can I also use this as an opportunity to elevate and uplift other people as well. So I really do believe, and I think it's in the invest in or support disabled entrepreneurs chapter, but there's a chapter in the book called Support Disabled Entrepreneurs. And at the end, it says, think about the things that you purchase and see if there's a disability owned, a way that you can support a disability owned business. And then I have an example that's
Right.
like, you can search disability owned bookstore, or you can search disability owned candle company. And then even disability owned
Wait,
jewelry company. What?
that's genius. That's, I mean, I'm disabled and I'm I'm an entrepreneur and not once would I have thought about that.
Really?
Sorry. No, I don't know why. I'm staring at my candle. I once you said candle company, I like there's a candle over here. And I was just thinking this morning, I was like, man, we should really get some more
Oh,
candles.
and I actually
Because
just
this
met
one's lit as
someone.
well.
She lives in Michigan who owns a candle company, and I met her in LA because she was talking to different stores that could stock her candles too. But yeah, and honestly, I know two disability owned candle companies. I can send you those two. And one is
Please,
LA based.
please
Her
do
name
that.
is Farah. Do you know
What the
Farah?
heck?
Farah.
I might.
I would say the last name, but I don't know if I have the correct one. I'll just send it to you.
It's
But yeah,
okay.
you could, and so like we again, like we exist everywhere. And then it's like, okay, even after that search, if you're not able to find one, like, then let's look up women owned companies or black owned companies,
Right.
and different companies to support. Uh, so yeah. And I will say, I think even as part of this cultural shift, what has been interesting for me to be witness to is there's a handbag company that I have loved for probably like 10 years. And I just noticed recently that they added to their bio AAPI and women owned. And
Love that.
I want to share that, yes, while our identities are and our sheer existence is political, I believe that I actually interviewed someone in the community recently, and I love what they said. They said, oftentimes when we share our identities, people have weaponized them to be like overly politicized. But then they
Mm.
said, the reason why we share our identities is so that we can find each other and find community and realize that we're not alone in our experience. And I actually
Yes.
really love that, because I'm not coming out saying like I'm an Asian disabled woman for you to feel threatened, for people who don't
Right.
share my identities. I'm sharing it because hopefully maybe I can find my people, and I come back to, I think about little Cassidy, who a lot of what you're doing now is to be that representation that you couldn't find growing up. And I don't know if you read page 0 of the book, the dedication page, but I dedicated this book to 9-year-old Tiffany. And I think
Yeah.
about the world that she felt like she was in 1997, which I believe is probably before you were born. um,
It was.
but that's okay. We're having an intergenerational conversation,
Yes.
But I think about 9-year-old Tiffany a lot, and she is why I'm doing so much of this. Um, she is the reason why I have found this incredible community that you and I can go to any event and find each other and see Andrea and Cara and Molly and like Jen and Chrissy, and that actually makes things fun. Like, I don't know, I think I went to an event recently where I literally didn't know anyone, and then I like sat by myself, and then I went and I grabbed food by myself, and then I like left. Maybe I talked to one person, but yeah, it's fun when we find each other. Like, it makes me think, like, even in my mid to late 30s, I still get that social anxiety of going to events and like not knowing anyone. And now that
Mhm.
more of us are finding each other, even if it started out online, it makes it so that we feel like we belong, because we actually do
Yeah.
belong everywhere. But That was a very long-winded answer to if people
No,
can do one
I
thing.
appreciate it.
Yeah. And so I would
Yeah,
encourage your
and
listeners, like, even like disability owned coffee. Like, I'm just looking around at things
things you
things
own.
I have, like disability owned hats. Uh,
I'm a disability owned crocheter.
oh, are
So
you? And actually, there's actually a crocheter who has one arm, and I don't know if she has the same injury I do, but
that is so cool.
she has like a big wooden block that she puts that she stabilizes the crochet in, because I think I want to get more into like knitting and crochet stuff.
Please.
And again,
I
here's
think
where
you
the
would be really good at
representation
it.
comes. What'd you say?
I said I think you'd be really good at it.
And also, it's okay to have hobbies that you are horrific at.
It's true. I was really bad at crocheting, and then
Oh, and then you became good.
I was.
Um,
And then I became really good at it because I have this probably horrible internal dialogue. Now that I'm thinking about it, that's like, you're bad at this, you're gonna get really good at it.
ooh,
Like, you're gonna master it.
like,
And so now I'm really good at
ooh,
it.
I like that. I'm bad at bowling, but I still go. Uh,
I'm also bad at bowling, but I love it.
I'm I'm really bad at swimming, but I did a triathlon.
Oh, I'd love
You
that.
know, like, yeah,
That's
and
great.
yeah, I mean, I think this ties into a broader conversation around like joy. Like, we
Yes.
don't need to
What
be.
brings you joy? It doesn't matter if you're bad at it, do it.
Uh,
I was also really bad at cooking, like before I moved out on my own. Like if you ask any of my family members, they will tell you the reason they were terrified of sending me out on my own was not disability related. I mean, I'm sure some of it was for my mom, but the main issue they had was like, oh my gosh, she's gonna die because she cannot cook for herself. Like I was, and it again not disability related. I was just horrible at cooking. So and now I'm the man cook in the family.
oh, really? I
So
mean,
yeah, and
you're just sharing things that you're good at that you start. I mean, I am still bad at bowling, even after playing for very
okay,
long.
I'm also still bad at bowling. Let's see, what else am I bad at? I'm bad at drawing, but I like doing it.
Oh, I get a
I'm
lot of
bad
joy
at
out of
building furniture.
painting.
Oh yeah, I'm bad at I love painting. I'm bad at buying furniture, or I'm bad at like building furniture.
Ooh.
Yet I will never buy it pre-assembled.
Then do you hire
No,
someone or you attempt to build it?
no, I attempt to build
Oh,
it.
no, that part's fun
Because
too.
I find joy out of it because I'm like when I do this correctly, it's gonna like I can look at that table in my living room and be like I did that, you know.
Yeah. And I guess I
Uh,
will also say, back to your question around like one thing. So yeah, so I forget what chapter it is, but it's probably like chapter chapter 28. I mean, I don't know. I'm chapter 28. But one thing I thought was fascinating, and I'm curious your thoughts on this too, because you're like, what's one thing you want people to know? And sometimes the one thing we want people to know is that disability is not a bad word, right? Or a
mhm,
bad thing, right? It's those are chapter 1 and 2 of the book. And what I think is
right.
interesting is there was a big campaign recently about disability is not a bad word, right? And I will say that I was a little I know it's been floating around our world for a long period of time. And if in 2024 we are still working on trying to get people on board with the fact that a billion of us have an experience that is not bad, like how are we going to get to the livelihoods, right? So yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on that. Like if you could see a bus billboard which would have the anti-ableist thought on it, what would your bus billboard say?
What would my buzz billboard say? Um,
Because then you're like disability
I really
representation matters.
That's a good one. I saw one recently that actually, if you go to the Grove in LA, there's that was like my hangout spot in college. In college, meaning a year ago when I graduated. Uh, um, I did see a billboard by a company, but I don't remember what company it was. It said hire disabled actors.
Ooh,
And I thought it wasn't on like a huge billboard, but it was on one of those what are those, like the
The
electronic
Yeah, the
ones
rolling ones.
now?
Was it from the
Yeah,
Inevitable Foundation?
yes, that's who it was. And I loved it. And they have a bunch of them. Which is like listen to disabled people, hire disabled actors, and so I would probably steal that from them, or I would partner with them and then make a billboard. It would probably be something along those lines, like listen to disabled people. I really liked what you said earlier, which was what was it? It was help a disabled person's livelihood,
Yeah.
or
Or
support a disabled person's
yeah.
livelihood.
I mean, a more simpler way to say it is pay us. Because
Yes.
I thought what was interesting was, you're in the modeling acting world, and I had a conversation a few years ago with one of the agencies, and one of the things they said was it's not about the money, it's about the representation and the visibility. And I said, like, whoa, like, again, we're still
It's
existing in
both.
capitalism. I said yes to the representation and the visibility, but I think it also needs to be paired with value. Um, because it's like,
We have to live too. We also have to pay rent. So
yes.
like
And sometimes our rent is more than, and sometimes our needs cost more than other people too.
they do. Yeah, I think that a lot of people, I've heard that from like quite a few companies that are like, well, not in these exact words, but basically, well, we gave you like you're on a billboard in Times Square. So like that should be enough. I'm like, no, I should also be paid. Like I should be paid as much as my fellow, able-bodied, non-disabled actor or model or whatever. Those kinds of things where like, yes, just being visible is not enough though. It's pay me,
Yeah.
pay me the money that I'm doing the same job as my non-disabled, peers. So pay me as much as they're getting paid.
And I will say,
That's why you join the union.
yes, yes. Yes to the unions. I mean, I think I heard we were at an event recently where they were talking about the importance of a union. Or I don't know if you were at the event too. But I also want to share that like all of all of this exists on a scale. There will be some things you do that, you know, maybe due to the circumstances or the type of organization, like they don't have the budget, and um but it will like lead to something else.
Yes.
So yeah, and I feel I don't want to that does not contradict anything that I said earlier. But I will say there are
Nope.
things that I will do that are paid, and then I may do those similar things for another organization or for a community, for someone in the community, um, that is at a different rate.
Yeah. Or free. I've done like a lot of things for other disabled people, and I'm like, no, don't pay me. Just like I want to help,
Well, if
or
the
you
I
know,
like to say like, hey, if you have the means, this,
yes,
um,
I agree.
but
Okay,
yeah,
I want to be thoughtful of your time, but I have one more question for you.
yes,
So my main demographic is on social media is young people, usually ages 13 to 18. And I get some that are my age, like 18 to 24 ish, but usually 13 to 18. And I get comments every single day from disabled people, young disabled people. And so, my question to every single disabled woman that I've had on the podcast is what would your message be to young disabled girls or young disabled kids in general?
I think I would say that being in community is your power. And I think about how, I didn't realize you were 22, but that was like the beginning of my journey in this space. I was 21, and I thought about how my life may have looked different if I had found community earlier. And even
Mm.
when I watched Crip Camp and I saw these disabled teenagers going to camp together. And I was like, what was the version of Crip Camp when I was growing up? And so yeah, I'll say that. I mean, it's interesting because I don't do that much work with teenagers because that age is so it's so tough. Like your body's changing, you want to fit in,
Kids are mean.
kids are mean, and at the same time, I think I'm realizing now as I've gotten older that my superpower, whether I know we feel something about that word, but like my superpower is being myself. And
Mm.
I often tell people, sometimes even with this book out, people are like, oh, how is this book different from that other book? And I said, like, you can give someone all my slides or even like my whole book, but they will interpret the things I'm saying differently through their lens. So I guess a long winded way to say, I hope you don't feel alone and know that there are communities out there for you. And I know young people aren't really using Facebook these days, but Facebook groups are actually the reason why a lot of my friends are still active on social media. So yeah, that's what I think I would say. There was actually a campaign a couple years ago called hashtag This Is 18, and it was advice that you would give to your 18-year-old self, which for me was like half my lifetime ago. And I oftentimes will revisit that post. It was like an initiative of it was like a campaign through the New York Times. And in that post, I say something along the lines of like, it's okay to grieve the things that you've lost, but know that your story didn't and doesn't end there.
Mm.
You will find your voice and you'll find your people. And I can't wait to see who you become, which that last line is what ended up becoming the dedication to younger Tiffany. So I think I would say that, it's hard because I want to say like something like it gets better. And oftentimes when I'm asked to like give advice to either my younger self or this next generation, it's really hard to tell someone who's going through a really hard time that it'll get better because those words won't land.
Yeah.
I don't know what the alternative message is instead, other than to say, I know you feel like you might be really alone, but your people are out there, like really excited for you to find them.
I love that. So this goes into my very, very last question for you before we wrap up. Where can people find you and how can they support you in your book?
So the best way to find me is through my website, tiffanyyu.com. And while you're there, you'll see all the links to my different social channels. You can learn more about Diversability. You can purchase the book. The best way to support the book outside of purchasing it, if you don't have the means, is by requesting it at your local library, or you can even check it out at your local library. And all you have to do is do an online search for request a title and then the name of your local library. And then the other way you can support is by leaving a review on Amazon and Goodreads. And I know that people have some opinions about the ownership of those two entities, but I'll also add that there are algorithms that I don't understand, that push out or create more visibility for books based on reviews. And it also helps readers better understand if this book is for them or not. And I
Yeah.
think even for you, Cassidy, if you got an early copy of the book, you probably have a second copy now because you were at that.
I have three,
Oh, we could do
actually.
a giveaway or something.
I am. I was just going to say. So, another way you can support Tiffany is by going to follow me and going to follow Tiffany. And then I'm going to post a picture of us together on Instagram. And when I post that, all you have to do is follow us both, like the post, comment, and you will be entered to win a copy of the Anti-Ableist Manifesto.
Woo woo.
Well, Tiffany, thank you so, so, so much for joining. I really appreciate it. This has been the View from 4 Feet and 3 Inches. Again, I'm your host, Cassidy Huff. Please make sure to follow me on all my platforms because I do post on social media every single day. I've taken a brief hiatus, but I'm back now. So please make sure to go follow me on all those platforms. I post on Facebook, Instagram, Reels, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts every single day. I have a YouTube vlog that comes out every Wednesday and a podcast episode here on the View from 4 Feet and 3 Inches that comes out every Sunday. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.